in this bifurcated way that really is fooling the American people about what the defense budget is?
We're not trying to fool anybody, sir. It's two bills, one budget. We're working with OMB, and we feel very comfortable with the number of $961 billion.
Why don't you give us a straight-up budget for the Defense Department?
Senator King.
Mr. Secretary, I'm somewhat puzzled. I grew up in Virginia where Robert E. Lee was revered. I think when I was a kid, his birthday was a school holiday. But as I grew older and learned more about American history, I learned that he fit the classic definition of a traitor. He took up arms against his country. He broke his oath as a member of the United States Army, which he took upon entering his career at West Point. Why are you going through these incredible gymnastics, finding current soldiers or other soldiers to rename? And you slipped a minute ago. You said we're returning these bases to their original names. Robert E. Lee, leading general of the Confederacy, Pickett, the other names. Why are you doing this? I don't understand what the motivation is to rename bases for people who took up arms against their country on behalf of slavery. What possible motivation can there be for this? Who is telling you to do this? Who is urging you to do this?
Senator, the veterans and service members across the country who have deployed from Fort Bragg or Fort Benning or Fort Hood or Fort Pickett, there's a legacy, there's a connection to those bases and to those places, to what they trained for there, what they did for, and what they came home back to. That matters to them. Ask enough of them, as I do, all the time, before and later. And we recognize the service of those who were put into the replacement. No one's disputing that. I would never dispute that. What we're looking at is erasing history, erasing names, erasing base names that service members are tied to.
Talk to people that serve at
Bragg. Ask people that serve at Fort Bragg or Fort Benning if they like the fact that the names have been returned. And to a man and to a woman, they will tell you, thank God we're back to Fort Bragg, and thank God we're back. And thankfully, because so many men and women in this country have served, there's a Benning and a Bragg and a Pickett and a Hood that has a Silver Star or a Medal of Honor that we could rename the base to because of the limits of what Congress allowed us to do. So this is something we've been proud to do, something that's important for the morale of the Army, and those communities appreciate that we've returned it back to what it was instead of trying to play this game of erasing names.
We're not erasing history, Mr. Secretary. We're recognizing history and recognizing that mistakes have been made in this country. The greatest of all was the Civil War, where people took up arms against their country on behalf of the institution of slavery. And to continue the practice of recognizing those people and honoring them by the naming of these bases is, I believe, an insult to the people of the United States. Let me talk about the budget. I don't understand why the budget is coming to us in two pieces. Why not give us an honest base budget instead of putting a piece of it in reconciliation? As I understand it, OMB is saying we're going to have a flat defense budget for the next 4 or 5 years. Are we planning reconciliation every year from now on? Why not give us an honest budget telling us what your priorities are, and then we can consider it. This committee always works in a bipartisan basis on a defense budget. We all want to see some increases in the defense budget, and yet you're giving us this this fake, here's a piece of the budget, here's another. You're cutting, in the base budget, you're cutting shipbuilding in half and saying, well, we're going to make it up in reconciliation. Are we going to have reconciliation every year, which basically, by the way, puts a significant part, 10 or 15% of the defense budget in a wholly partisan decision-making process, whereas in the history of this committee, it's always been bipartisan. Why are we doing it this way?
Senator, from our view, the budget number 961 meets the requirements and threats that we face. And
that's not the number. The number is 892.6. You're adding reconciliation. That's my whole point. Why not give us a base budget of 961 or whatever the right number is, what you consider the right number, and then we can operate and make our decisions. Why do it in this bifurcated way that really is fooling the American people about what the defense budget is?
We're not trying to fool anybody, sir. It's two bills, one budget.
I haven't asked my
We're
question
working with
yet. Why is it being
OMB,
done
we feel
this
very
way?
comfortable
Why is
with
it
the
being
number of
done this way?
$961 billion.
Why don't you give us a straight-up budget for the Defense Department? That's my question.
Senator, this is a straight-up budget for the Defense Department, and it's a
It is
13%
not.
increase over what Joe Biden
It is
gave
a
us.
two-part defense budget. Part of it is in reconciliation instead of in the budget that's being presented to this committee. This committee only has a partial review of the budget. I don't understand why we can't have an honest, straightforward budget instead of this son of Oko that you're putting over on us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing on Wednesday, Senator Angus King, Independent Maine, pressed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth about the Pentagon's decision to restore the names of military bases that had previously been renamed. King opened by reflecting on his own upbringing in Virginia, where Confederate General Robert E. Lee was celebrated, even receiving a school holiday in his honor. As a child, King said, Lee was regarded as a heroic figure. But with time, he came to a different understanding. History, he argued, made it clear that Lee was not a patriot but a traitor. He broke his oath as a U.S. Army officer, took up arms against his country, and fought to defend slavery. King questioned why, in 2025, the Defense Department would actively work to restore bases to names that honored Lee, Pickett, and other Confederate figures. "Why are you doing this?" King asked. "What possible motivation can there be to honor men who betrayed their country on behalf of slavery? Who is urging you to do this?" His words reflected not just historical judgment but frustration that the issue was resurfacing decades after the Civil War. Secretary Hegseth defended the move by pointing to veterans and active duty service members. He argued that many who served at places like Fort Bragg, Fort Benning, and Fort Hood felt deep ties to those names. The bases represented where they trained, where they deployed from, and where they returned after war. To them, he said, these names weren't about honoring slavery, but about honoring shared experiences and sacrifices. "Ask the men and women who served there," Hegseth explained. "They will tell you, thank God we're back to Fort Bragg." He insisted the changes had boosted morale and had been welcomed by military communities across the country. King pushed back sharply. To him, the issue was not about morale but about truth. The Civil War, he said, was the country's greatest mistake, Americans taking up arms against their own nation to preserve slavery. To continue naming U.S. Army installations after Confederate generals, he argued, dishonored the country and insulted the very idea of the United States. Keeping those names, in his view, was a way of erasing the lessons of history rather than facing them honestly. The discussion then shifted to another contentious topic, the defense budget. King criticized the Biden administration's decision to present the budget in two parts, splitting it into a base budget and a reconciliation package. He said this approach made it impossible for Congress to evaluate the true size and priorities of the defense budget. "Why not give us an honest budget?" King pressed. "Instead, you're giving us a piece here and a piece there, cutting shipbuilding in half in the base budget and saying you'll make it up in reconciliation. That puts 10 to 15% of our defense budget into a partisan process, when this committee has always handled defense on a bipartisan basis." King accused the administration of fooling the American people by disguising the full number and forcing Congress to work with an incomplete picture. He said the practice undermined transparency and set a dangerous precedent for how national defense is funded. Hegseth stood firm in his defense, insisting that the $961 billion total was accurate and represented a 13% increase over the previous year. He said the figure met the requirements of the nation's defense strategy and reflected input from the Office of Management and Budget. From his perspective, the Pentagon had presented a clear budget. "It's two bills, one budget," Hegseth argued, pushing back against King's suggestion of deception. But King remained unconvinced. He said the way the budget had been presented was confusing, partisan, and inconsistent with the committee's tradition of bipartisan cooperation on defense spending. "Why don't you give us a straight-up budget for the Defense Department?" he demanded. Hegseth reiterated his position, but the exchange ended with King openly frustrated, accusing the administration of sleight of hand and calling for a more direct, transparent process. The hearing highlighted two separate but connected debates: how America remembers its past and how it funds its future defense. On both fronts, King argued for clarity, accountability, and honesty, while Hegseth defended the administration's choices as practical and supported by those most directly tied to the military.